no collusion. The special counsel releases his report into the Trump campaign's possible ties to Russia in the 2016 election. We have a report, analysis, and reaction from the nation's capital. Clergy abuse crisis. Pope Francis accepts the resignation of an archbishop in Chile. We're in Rome. Ready to return. An update on the Catholic priest attacked while celebrating Mass in Montreal. And this teacher has class. A Franciscan brother wins a global award. What he'll do with the $1 million prize. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, March 25th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. No collusion and not enough evidence to support obstruction of justice. The findings from the long-awaited Mueller report led the president to say he was exonerated. But Democrats disagree and vow to continue the 2-year investigation. When asked if the special investigation was a witch hunt,
I love this country as much as I can love anything, my family, my country, my God. But what they did, it was a false narrative. It was a terrible thing. We can never let this happen to another president again.
And when asked if Robert Mueller acted honorably, the president changing his tone toward Mueller after the special prosecutor's report cleared him of collusion with Russia during his campaign. Even the accusation of obstruction of justice fell short on evidence. The Justice Department says Mueller wrapped up his investigation without any new indictments.
This was a total vindication of the President of the United States and our campaign, and it should be welcomed by every American.
Vice President Mike Pence says Trump was exonerated despite reckless accusations by many Democrats and members of the media. The question now, how much of the full report will be made public? Press Secretary Sarah Sanders says President Trump will let Attorney General William Barr decide. So far, he's only released a 4-page summary.
We want to do the right thing, not just for this president, but for all administrations. We want to make sure we're protecting the office of the presidency. We have to look at things like executive privilege. We have to look at protecting sources and methods for the intelligence community.
The Mueller findings are reverberating around Capitol Hill. Democrats say they have unanswered questions. Republicans champion this as a presidential vindication. One GOP senator says he wants to investigate those who started the investigation into the Trump campaign. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi continues our coverage. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Robert Mueller's work is done. President Donald Trump's Attorney General William Barr sent a 4-page summary of the investigation here to Congress, but the embers from this controversial investigation are still smoldering.
Attorney General Barr's summary of the 2-year investigation sent to 4 lawmakers, including Senate Judiciary Chairman Lindsey Graham.
I believe that Donald Trump got scrutiny like nobody else in the history of the presidency, since Nixon probably. And he, in my view, came out of this thing stronger. To those who were abusive of the process in 2016 on the other side, you haven't had much scrutiny, but that's coming.
The Republican Judiciary Chairman says he wants to investigate the actions of the Justice Department in 2016.
People on our side believe that the system was out to get Trump and help Clinton. Yeah, I'm talking about a special counsel, not Mr. Mueller, somebody like Mueller to look at them.
For now, Democrats say they hope to get the chance to mull Mueller's still unreleased report.
But really, this should not be based on a couple paragraphs of recitation of what the Attorney General thinks the conclusions are of this 2-year investigation.
Still, Democrats seize on Barr saying Mueller did not come to a conclusion on if the president obstructed justice.
Mueller did not exonerate the president on obstruction of justice. In fact, after 2 years of investigation, Mueller said he couldn't make a determination, and it's highly concerning that what Mueller couldn't do after 2 years, the Attorney General thinks he can do after 2 days.
At the end of the day, Barr and Rosenstein looked at the report and said there's no case here, and that's over.
Both Senate and House Judiciary Chairmen say they'd like Attorney General Barr to testify. House Democrats say they'd subpoena Mueller and Barr if needed. I asked Chairman Graham if he'd call Special Counsel Mueller to testify. He said no. He doesn't want to turn this into a bigger circus. Now, the full House this month voted to urge the release of the full Mueller report. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. Joining me now by Skype from the Heritage Foundation is senior legal fellow Hans von Spakovsky. Hans, welcome back to our broadcast.
Thanks for having me back.
You join Vice President Pence and many Republicans who say this is a complete vindication for the president and a victory against his detractors. Why?
Well, because after 2 years of a very wide-ranging, thorough investigation, the special counsel says there was no collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. And look, the critics of the president can't in any way claim this wasn't a thorough investigation. In fact, William Barr summarized the extent to which Mueller went. They've interviewed 500 different witnesses, served almost 3,000 subpoenas and 500 search warrants to get information and documents on this. And at the end of that said there was no evidence of any collusion.
Well, I have the Attorney General's memo here dated yesterday.
Right.
Democrats are saying not so fast, and they're pointing to this summary and Special Counsel Mueller's statement regarding possible obstruction of justice. And it says,
Right.
quote, while this report does not conclude the president committed a crime, it also does not exonerate him. So as a former Justice Department lawyer, Hans, what do you make of this open-ended finding?
Well, I think the Democrats are just whistling past a graveyard, if I can use an expression, if they think anything is going to come out of that. Look, there's a lot of legal debate over whether a president can even be charged with obstruction of justice, since he is actually the chief law enforcement official under the Constitution, makes the final decision. Mueller obviously didn't want to get into that, so he's just simply laid out the facts on both sides of this issue. William Barr looked at that, consulted with other senior officials, and said there isn't any evidence of obstruction of justice. And the key thing for folks to remember is this: it's pretty tough to claim there was obstruction of justice when there was no underlying crime, and therefore there wasn't anything to obstruct. If Democrats think they're going to be able to make something of that, they're going to be sadly mistaken.
How do you think the calls for these additional investigations are going to be received by the American people?
Well, I do think that a lot of people see what happened, and let's be very plain. The claims of Russian collusion turned out to be a hoax, and what does need to be investigated is how and why was this investigation opened by the FBI and the Justice Department when they actually had no credible evidence that any kind of collusion had occurred? Did they abuse their power? Did they abuse the FISA statute to get electronic surveillance of an opposition political campaign?
So what happens now to the evidence in this report related to Russian interference?
Well, remember, there are still outstanding indictments that have not come to completion yet. Remember, Mueller indicted a number of Russian military agents and other officials for trying to interfere in the election through social media platforms and for hacking into the DNC computers and those of Hillary Clinton. Important to keep in mind, the report says that no one in the Trump campaign, in fact, no Americans in any way participated in that event.
Hans von Spakovsky, Senior Legal Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, thank you for joining us.
So thanks for having me.
Pope Francis traveled to Loreto, an Italian pilgrimage site dedicated to Our Lady. While there, he signed a new document dedicated to today's youth. The Holy Father celebrated Mass in Loreto's cathedral and then signed the document in private. It will be released April 2nd and will provide the Pope's take on the October Synod of Bishops on ways to reach young people. The meeting last year was dominated by discussion about how to welcome people with same-sex attraction into the church, give women a greater say in decision-making, and manage the sex abuse scandal. On Saturday, Pope Francis accepted the resignation of the Archbishop of Santiago, Chile, after he was placed under criminal investigation for covering up sex abuse. In his last homily yesterday, Cardinal Ricardo Ezadi apologized for his weakness.
Con clara conciencia También pido perdón por mis debilidades y mis flaquezas.
The 77-year-old submitted his resignation to Pope Francis 2 years ago when he reached the mandatory retirement age of 75. Since last year, Azadi is the 8th church leader in Chile whose resignation has been accepted by the Holy Father. Alan Holdren is the EWTN Rome Bureau Chief. Alan, Cardinal Azadi became the flashpoint of abuse survivors' anger for mishandling several cases. Why is he being investigated?
Well, Lauren, there are 3 different priests that are being accused of abuses under his watch there in the Archdiocese of Santiago, Chile. Prosecutors are speaking now in particular about a close deputy of his there in the Cathedral of Santiago that's being accused of misconduct that happened within the cathedral. The victim says that the Archbishop knew about it. He says that he didn't. So he's really under the spotlight, as you said, but he is fighting these claims still, even though the Pope has accepted his resignation as of Saturday. He says that he leaves with his head held high, says that all of the cases that came up under his watch since 2011 have been investigated or are in the process of being investigated.
Alan, why did Pope Francis accept his resignation but didn't accept one from Cardinal Barbarin of France, despite his conviction for covering up abuse?
Well, in the case of Cardinal Barbarin, Lauren, the process is ongoing. The Cardinal is expected to make an appeal later on this year. In the case of this Cardinal, Ezzati, down in Santiago, the prosecutors dismissed his plea to not participate in the continuation of the trial. And he's also over the age of 75, which is the age of resignation for any bishops. All bishops of the world, when they reach that age, submit their resignation. In this case, he's 77 years old, and I'm sure that also factored into it.
So what happens now in Santiago? Does someone replace Cardinal Azadi? How long will that take?
Yeah, he's already been replaced by what they call an apostolic administrator. This is a bishop of another diocese within Chile, the Diocese of Copiapo. He's Bishop Celestino Braco, and he's a Spanish-born Capuchin friar. Now, he comes into this situation knowing a little bit about how these processes work. He's worked in investigations into priest misconduct in the past. He's actually being accused by an alleged victim, saying that he didn't do enough to move a case forward quickly. This alleged victim says that the bishop stalled, but he steps into the role saying the church has its shortcomings and there's a lot of light and darkness, and he asked for prayers as he takes on this role.
Well, another cardinal is leaving the Vatican. Thank you so much. Alan Holdren, EWTN Rome Bureau Chief.
Thank you, Lauren.
Sirens wail across southern Israel as rocket attacks intensify. The Israeli Prime Minister says his country's military is striking back in the Gaza Strip. Benjamin Netanyahu made the announcement today while visiting Washington. He says Israel will not tolerate the rocket attacks, one of which hit a family's home. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby has more from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's schedule has been in flux a little bit this afternoon as he attends a security meeting, but we can tell you that he is likely cutting his 2-day trip to the United States short so that he can return to Israel. This evening, an Israeli airstrike destroyed a multi-story Hamas building in Gaza City, but Hamas's leader says his group will not surrender and has launched 10 rockets in retaliation. Violent protests near the Gaza-Israel border coming to a head today. A long-range rocket struck this house in central Israel early this morning, wounding 7 people.
This is the real price, and I just paid it, and I nearly lost my family. And if we hadn't have got to the bomb shelter in time, I would now be burying all my family.
Top Israeli officials are blaming Hamas, the Gaza-based Palestinian Islamic fundamentalist group the United States calls a terrorist organization.
Time and again, they're initiating unprovoked attacks on Israeli citizens, villages, homes, and cities.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also condemning Hamas for the attack. In a video statement this morning, Netanyahu said he would meet with President Trump for a few hours before coming back. Netanyahu, who's running for re-election in his country, getting a warm welcome at the White House. President Trump vowed support for Israel in wake of the attack.
The despicable attack this morning demonstrates the significant security challenges that Israel faces every single day.
President Trump also signing a proclamation recognizing Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, a disputed territory between Israel and Syria. But not everyone agrees with the White House's strong show of support for Israel. A group called Jews United Against Zionism protesting Netanyahu's arrival outside the White House this morning. These rabbis do not believe the state of Israel represents the Jewish people.
We appeal to the president to step back. He's from New York. He knows that the religious community that it's living in was in his backyard are anti-Zionist.
Despite the protests, the Trump administration is giving the state of Israel their full backing. Vice President Mike Pence and former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley both spoke at an AIPAC conference today. That's the American Pro-Israel Lobbyist Group. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is also speaking there tonight. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. Coming up, Down syndrome and the United Nations, what the Holy See mission to the UN is doing. State senators in Georgia pass a heartbeat bill. It would ban abortions once a baby's heartbeat is detected, which can be as early as 6 weeks. The measure goes to the House, where it's expected to be approved. The Republican governor backs the proposal. Currently, women in Georgia can have an abortion up to 20 weeks of pregnancy. Participants in the United Nations Commission for Women are advocating for increased international access to abortion. The Vatican and other Catholic groups are presenting a pro-life perspective, and that includes Karen Gaffney, who swam the Boston Harbor and the San Francisco Bay.
I talk differently. I walk differently. I don't hear as well as most of you do. And I don't see as well either. And sometimes it takes me longer to learn things. Now, another thing that's different about me is that I can probably swim much longer and much farther than anyone here in this room.
When it comes to aborting Down syndrome babies, the U.S. has an abortion rate of 67%. In Denmark and Iceland, it's nearly 100%. Sabrina Ferrisi joins us from the United Nations in New York. Welcome, Sabrina.
Thank you, Lauren.
What does the high abortion rate depend on?
A great deal depends on how the doctor gives the diagnosis for Down syndrome. Many of the panelists at the conference told us horror stories of how they were told that they were having a Down syndrome child and in the next breath offered an abortion. One panelist, Rick Smith from Texas, told us that the doctor said, "I'm sorry, you're having a Down syndrome child, and can I prescribe some antidepressants?" So a great deal depends on the doctor, if they can give the diagnosis, but also to relay some hope. Another factor is personal knowledge. If you know a family that has a Down syndrome child and you can see that that family is happy, that goes a long way. So one of the panelists, Rick Smith, again from Texas, he started an organization called Hope Story, where they pair up families with the diagnosis with another family that has a Down syndrome child so that they can get to know what it's like to have a Down syndrome child and feel a little bit happier about it.
That seems very helpful. So tell me what the Holy See mission to the UN hopes to accomplish with this conference.
Well, this is the second year that they had a Down syndrome conference, and their mission is to bring attention to the high abortion rate and the terrible injustice that is suffered by the Down syndrome community, but also by bringing these families to speak, to show people how beautiful these families can be.
We've heard from people with Down syndrome and the amazing accomplishments. Tell us what their families told you.
Every single one of them talked about how happy they were to have their child and what a blessing it had been in their life. Deanna Smith, one of the panelists, said that the problem she realized was not the Down syndrome. The problem is often misperception of what a Down syndrome child could be like. She said it was one of the best things that had ever happened to her and her family. She said her daughter Addison taught them about love and acceptance, but also the value of being yourself without the self-conscious fear of what that means.
Of course. And I know that there is a Down Syndrome Day, March 21st, for the 21st chromosome. Right, but are there people at the UN who need persuasion? Is that part of the reason for this conference?
Yes. So even though the UN in 2011 instituted a global Down Syndrome Awareness Day to talk about the human rights and needs of Down syndrome children, there are also senior UN officials who talk about the right of mothers to abort their Down syndrome child. So there is still a need at the UN to convince people.
Sabrina Ferrisi reporting from the United Nations. Thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you, Lauren.
Up next, an update on the Catholic priest in Canada attacked while celebrating Mass. And a Franciscan brother wins a global award. We'll tell you about it. Today is the Annunciation of our Lord, celebrating the coming of the Archangel Gabriel to the Virgin Mary to announce that she would become the mother of Jesus. It's an important solemnity for the Church and comes 9 months before the birth of Christ on Christmas. The Catholic priest stabbed while celebrating Mass at St. Joseph's Oratory in Montreal on Friday says he's ready to go back to work.
And now my health is fine. I'll take a little rest and I will be back to work and my rest is taken. And the oratory will remain a place where people can be welcome, in a place of prayer, in a place of calm and peace, even if there are some moments like that.
Father Claude Grew has been released from the hospital. The 77-year-old says he did not know his attacker. Police have one suspect in custody. Thousands of pro-life supporters rallied Saturday in Argentina. The march was called In Defense of Two Lives, a reference to protecting both the baby and the mother. Lawmakers in Pope Francis's homeland last year rejected a bill to legalize abortion. Finally tonight, out of 10,000 applications, a Franciscan brother from Kenya wins a global award for teaching. The prize, $1 million.
Peter Tabachi.
Actor Hugh Jackman presented the award to brother Peter Tabichi. Remarkably, his school in Kenya has one computer and sporadic internet access. He says this prize money is going toward upgrading those facilities and to feeding the poor.
I'm going to give it back to the society, okay? Because myself, I'm a brother. Okay, our needs are catered for, like food, clothing, and everything. So I'll be so happy. In fact, it is a great moment that the society is going to benefit.
He already donates 80% of his paycheck to charity. The ceremony was held in Dubai, and Brother Peter says it was the first time he had ever been on an airplane. What a wonderful man. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and at Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night and God bless you.